The laughter started before the case even began, low at first, then spreading across the courtroom like it had already decided how the story would end, and at the center of it all stood 17-year-old Darius Cole in cuffs, shoulders tense, trying not to let the humiliation show, because in a room like this weakness only made things worse, and to them he already looked guilty, already fit the image they expected, and that was enough, because sometimes perception doesn't wait for proof, it replaces it entirely. Before we start, hit that like and subscribe button, then comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. At the prosecution table, Attorney Halpern adjusted his suit with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from winning before the first word is spoken, while Darius stood alone with a tired public defender flipping through a thin file that didn't look like it held anything strong enough to fight back. No family in the gallery, no support, just strangers watching, judging, waiting, until the doors opened and Judge Eleanor Whitmore stepped in, commanding the room without raising her voice, taking her seat and saying one word, "Proceed." The prosecutor moved smoothly, laying out his version of events like it was already fact. Darius found near a stolen car, late at night, no explanation, suspicious behavior, a narrative so clean it didn't need much evidence because it already sounded believable, and the courtroom leaned into it easily, nodding, agreeing, accepting, because it made sense to them, too much sense. And when Darius finally spoke, saying he didn't steal anything, it didn't land as truth, it landed as something they had heard too many times before, dismissed with a smirk and a quiet, "They all say that," and the laughter returned, sharper now, heavier, pressing down on him until the prosecutor asked the question that mattered most, whether he had proof of where he was. Darius hesitated, not because he was guilty but because the truth wasn't something he could just pull out on command, and when he said, "No," the room shifted again, leaning further into judgment, because that single word felt like confirmation, like the final piece they needed. Except something unexpected happened. Because Judge Eleanor Whitmore didn't move forward, didn't nod, didn't follow the script everyone assumed she would, instead she looked down at the file in front of her and paused, and it wasn't a long pause but it was enough to disrupt the rhythm of the room, enough to make the prosecutor glance sideways, enough to silence the laughter. She turned a page. Then another. And then she asked for clarification, her voice calm but carrying weight, the kind that demands attention, and when the prosecutor confirmed the report was submitted that morning, she kept reading, her silence growing heavier with every second, until she let out a quiet breath that didn't sound like boredom or frustration but something closer to disbelief. That's when the tension truly shifted. Because for the first time, someone wasn't looking at Darius as a case, but as a person. She lifted her head and asked him why he hadn't mentioned any of it, and Darius, confused, asked what she meant. And that's when everything changed. Instead of answering directly, she began to read from the file, calmly, clearly, listing achievements that didn't match the image the courtroom had already accepted: academic excellence, top percentile rankings, science awards, leadership in community programs, and the silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy with realization, because the story they had believed was starting to crack. The laughter disappeared. Replaced by discomfort, by doubt, by the slow recognition that maybe they had been wrong. And then came the detail that shifted everything completely. Documented attendance at a late-night academic program at the exact time of the alleged crime. Now the case wasn't solid anymore. It was fractured. Because if Darius was somewhere else, then the entire accusation collapsed. The judge closed the file slowly, deliberately, looking up with a different kind of authority now, one that wasn't just about control but about truth, and she addressed the prosecutor, pointing out the certainty he had presented versus the contradiction now sitting in plain sight. And he had no response. Because for the first time, he wasn't in control of the narrative. And Darius stood there, realizing something he hadn't felt since the moment he was arrested, that someone was finally seeing him, not the stereotype, not the assumption, but the reality. But just as that realization began to settle, just as it felt like justice had finally stepped into the room, the courtroom doors swung open. Sudden. Sharp. A court officer rushed in holding new documents, his expression tense, urgent, and when he spoke, saying new evidence had just arrived, the entire room froze again, because nothing about that sounded simple. The judge frowned slightly and asked what kind of evidence it was. The officer hesitated. And that hesitation changed everything. Because when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the entire courtroom lean in without realizing it. The kind that changes the entire case. A chill moved through the room. Because whatever had just entered that courtroom wasn't just about proving Darius innocent anymore. It was about exposing something deeper. Something no one had expected. And standing there in the middle of it all, Darius felt it clearly, this wasn't over. Not even close. Because the truth had started to surface. But what was coming next was going to shake the entire courtroom in a way no one was prepared for. And when it finally came out, it wouldn't just clear his name. It would make everyone who laughed at him wish they had stayed silent. The courtroom didn't breathe. Not when the officer stepped forward. Not when the envelope changed hands. Not even when Judge Eleanor Whitmore opened it and began to read. Because by now, everyone understood something had shifted. And whatever was inside that file wasn't small. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, then slowed, then stopped, and in that tiny pause the entire room felt the weight of something serious settling in, because this wasn't confusion on her face anymore, this was recognition, the kind that comes when a hidden truth finally surfaces, and when she looked up, she didn't look at Darius first, she looked at the prosecutor. "Mr. Halpern," she said, her voice steady but colder than before, "you may want to see this." The confidence he walked in with cracked the moment he saw her expression, and as he stepped forward to take the document, the room leaned in, watching, waiting, searching his face for answers, and for a second he tried to hold his composure, tried to keep control of the narrative he had built so easily just minutes ago, but then his eyes moved across the page, and everything changed. Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. Because the truth doesn't argue, it reveals. "This evidence includes verified surveillance footage," the judge said, breaking the silence, her voice now carrying the full authority of the moment, time-stamped and cross-referenced. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Darius felt his heartbeat rise, not from fear this time, but from something unfamiliar, hope. "Footage," she continued, "that places Mr. Cole at a supervised academic program across town during the exact time of the alleged crime." And just like that, the entire case cracked. Not slowly. Not quietly. But completely. Because now, this wasn't about doubt anymore. This was about truth. The prosecutor tried to recover, his voice no longer as steady as before. "Your Honor, perhaps there's been a misinterpretation. It has been verified," she interrupted, not raising her voice but leaving no room for argument, "by multiple sources." Silence followed. The kind that forces people to confront what they got wrong. But she wasn't finished. Because the next part didn't just clear Darius, it exposed something deeper. "The footage also identifies another individual," she said. Now the tension returned. Stronger. Sharper. And when she signaled toward the door, no one moved at first, as if the room itself needed a second to process what was about to happen, but then the doors opened again, and another teenager was escorted inside, similar build, similar height, even wearing clothing that could easily be mistaken from a distance, and suddenly the confusion that had been ignored earlier now made sense. Darius stared. Frozen. Because for a moment, it felt like he was looking at his own reflection. This individual, the judge continued, was captured near the stolen vehicle. Gasps filled the room. Real ones this time. Not mocking. Not careless. Shocked. Because the narrative they had accepted so quickly had been wrong from the start. The prosecutor stepped back, his voice failing him now. This wasn't included. No, the judge said firmly, because it wasn't properly investigated. And there it was. The truth no one had wanted to say out loud. This wasn't just a mistake. This was assumption. Bias moving faster than facts. Judgment replacing justice. The judge turned back to Darius, and for the first time her voice softened, not with pity, but with respect. "Mr. Cole, you are free to go." The words didn't echo loudly, but they landed heavily. Because they carried everything that had been missing since the beginning. Truth. Fairness. Justice. The cuffs came off, and Darius didn't move right away, because moments like that don't feel real immediately, they settle slowly, like your mind needs time to catch up with your freedom, and as he took his first step forward, the room watched differently now, not with judgment, not with quiet laughter, but with something else entirely. Regret. Because they remembered. Every look. Every whisper. Every assumption. And now they had to sit with it. The judge turned her attention back to the prosecution, her voice firm again. "This case will be reviewed in full, along with the process that led to this courtroom. No shouting. No anger. Just accountability. The kind that lingers longer than any punishment." And as Darius walked toward the exit, each step felt lighter than the last, not just because he was free, but because he had been seen, truly seen, not as the label placed on him, not as the image they expected, but as who he really was. He reached the door. Paused. Because something in him needed to hear it one more time. "Mr. Cole," the judge called out. He turned. "This system is not perfect," she said, "but today, truth did what it was supposed to do." Darius nodded, quietly, deeply. Then he walked out. Free. And behind him, the same courtroom that once laughed, sat in silence. Because justice had been served, but not in the way they expected. It didn't just correct a case. It exposed a mindset. It revealed how quickly people judge, and how dangerous that judgment can be when left unchecked. And the lesson lingered long after the doors closed: never mistake assumption for truth, never let appearance replace evidence, and never underestimate someone just because they don't fit the story you've already written in your mind. Because sometimes, the person you're ready to dismiss is the very one who will force the truth into the light. And when that happens, it doesn't just change their story. It changes yours too. The end. Comment below if you know you enjoyed the story. Also, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and turn on the notification button for more stories coming up.